First thing you do before you lay out the leg is to determine what position they go in. So by selecting the preferable grain, what I want for it and things like that, went ahead and marked a triangle across the top. So now I know which is the front and which is the back. So taking the front left leg, I've already gone ahead and marked a line 6 inches down from the top on all of them, and I actually ganged them all together. You clamped them together using a square, drew a line all across, and then using one of these saddle squares, I transferred the lines down around the edges. So I have a line that is now on the board all the way around it. Now, what I'm going to do is lay out the mortise for the lower rail, the lower front rail. And actually here, you can see I've already got this mortise laid out. And what I'm doing, the bottom rail is going to be, actually all of the rails are going to be 1/2 inch up from the pommel right here where the leg transitions from square into a turn piece. I want a 1/2 inch up only because you're going to see a little bit of curved up in the corners and things like that, and I can't have that run into the rail. So before I go too much further and start chopping and things like that, I want to keep these same gauge settings. This is my mortise width and this is my length of tenon. I'm going to keep them and continue along and mark out the rest of the legs. So again, here is my front right leg. So I need to flip it around so that I can continue to reference off the front of the leg. So simply come in here, set my knife on the line for the pommel, and I'll come up a 1/2 inch. And what's nice is you can actually set your knife in the little lines on the ruler itself. So coming up a 1/2 inch, that marks the bottom of the mortise. Set your knife in that groove, press your ruler up against it, and then come up 1.5 inches. Again, I set my knife in the little line on the ruler itself and slide it into the wood. Now I've marked the outer edges of the mortise. Again, this is the front of the board here, so referencing the fence of the mortise gauge. Come back and mark this out. I like to get these mortise lines, these scribe lines, really nice and deep. And it doesn't matter if you go over your mark lines ever so slightly. It's all going to be covered up. And there is my other lower front rail mortise. And then I'm going to go and mark the tenon for that. Again, these are one-sided tenons. So using the same setting on this gauge, marking off the front reference face, the same face that would be against the front here. That's my reference face. So marking there, I basically scribe the lines on all 3 sides. And then I know that I want the mortise to be 1 inch deep. So I set another gauge for 1 inch, and I go ahead and I scribe the base of that tenon. So now you can see where I've marked it with the white grease paint. I have a tenon that is marked all the way around. Alright, that completes the layout of all the mortise and tenons, and I went ahead and actually scribed a tail, dovetail, on this top rail as well. Everything is marked out, and before you actually begin the chopping, it's always a smart move to just take one last kind of gut check. Double check your markings on the top of the legs and make sure you've got them in the proper orientation. And I'll lay them out on the bench, and I know that this is the front. So on the inside face, I should have a small mortise for the lower rail. The dovetail is not marked yet. I'm going to wait until I've got it assembled, and then I'll lay out the pin for that. So now on the front legs I should know, on the back I should have 2 mortises for the side rails. The back 2 legs, I've got those same 2 mortises to receive the side parts of the apron, and then I should have 2 mortises on the inside here. I've got 2 mortises marked inside there. Everything is laid out where it needs to be, and you can do the same check with all of the tenons. I know that my tenon is marked, this is my front face, and I'm essentially ready to go. So let's start with the lower rail mortise on the front leg. And the easiest thing to do is start kind of right in the middle of the mortise, stick my chisel in between my layout lines, and just give it a good whack. I'll turn the chisel around and go a little bit the other direction. Just give it a good whack, and that will leverage out a little bit of a chip in the middle. This gives us some room to work with. So now I've got the bevel facing the edge. I'm going to go work my way towards this edge, but not quite all the way to the edge. So now you can see the levering motion I'm doing here to move out these chips. You can see why I'm going to stop just a little ways away from the edge of the mortise, because I don't want to bruise those shoulders as I leverage that out. So now we'll go back, turn the bevel so that it's facing the other direction towards the other end of the mortise, and we'll work our way that way. This walnut is slippery. I'm thinking I shouldn't have smooth planed the legs already, because the chisel's slipping all over it. Okay, let's go down into the absolute depth of this mortise, right in the center, and I'll just kind of see where we are depth-wise. So we're about 3/4 of an inch deep. Because the edges of this mortise are sloped a little bit, now I'm going to turn it so that the flat of the chisel is facing the edge. When you feel you're close to the bottom, I come in with the bevel facing the end of the mortise and I kind of lever it. And at the angle, it essentially scrapes the bottom of the mortise and levels it out. So I'll do that from both ends. And then let's check again. Almost there. We're about 1/16 of an inch away from the total depth. So what you do is you go back to the middle and you work your way, just like the same process, back towards the shoulder, the bevel facing the shoulder. Okay, mortise is essentially formed to the depth I need. Now I'm just going to work my way slowly back to these edges, and those are just paring cuts. So you can either keep with your mortise chisel, or you can actually move over to a 1/4 inch bench chisel and pare back. Because I've got about 1/8 of an inch for the edges, I'm going to just keep with my mortise chisel and try to pound through it a little bit faster. This is really the only time in the mortise, though, where you need to focus on keeping it perpendicular to the face. So I like to stand off to the edge of my mortise so that I can see this direction. I can see that perpendicular dimension. At this point, I am going to switch over to just a normal bench chisel. And I'm going to actually set it in that scribe line on the end, and just a little light tap, just to define the very, very edge. Because I've got a gap in front of it now, I don't have to worry about the chisel bouncing back into and beyond my mortise, because the waste is going to follow the path of least resistance and drop it right into the gap you've already created. So now I've got a little bit better edge to register the mortise chisel against. I can set it in there. Now at this point, you want to only pull away from the shoulder. If you start leveraging this way, you're going to bruise that shoulder line. There's our first mortise. Nice and square and right on our layout lines. So I've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more mortises to go. So now it's time to cut the tenon for that mortise that we just chopped. And here you can clearly see my scribe lines, and I'm going to cut that one-sided tenon. So I'll set it in the vise at an angle like this, so that I can see two edges at once. I can see the scribe line up top there, and I can see this down here. And I'll pinch the wood. And this is a Rob Cosman technique where you pinch the wood and you can essentially move your saw back and forth. What I'm going to do is work my way down one of the lines. I'm focusing on the vertical line here. Working my way down that face. I need to keep a little bit of attention on the top face to make sure that I'm not, drastically off the angle. But I'm focused mostly on the vertical direction. Now, fit my baseline there, so now I can focus across the top. And just like when we were roughing out stock, really the surest way to stay to a line is a nice low angle. There, I'm going to trace that line all across the top. So now the easiest way to finish this is to just turn it around in the vise and go down that remaining bit. So I hit my baseline, and then go ahead and set it up vertically in the vise and just finish it off. have a tenon.
So the last thing I'll do to fit this tenon is just set it up right in the vise and then just come at it with a chisel. And I just want to ever so slightly clean up that shoulder. And I'm very slightly undercutting the shoulder here so that I get a very, very tight fit right at the edge of the board. And you know, this may or may not be necessary depending upon how well you cut your shoulders, but I just find that the natural imperfections of a handsaw need a little bit of cleaning up. You can see it fits very snugly. There's no gap in the joint. We've got a little bit of unevenness, that's where that shadow line is, and that will be taken up when I do a final planing on the legs.
The rest of the mortises that join the wider, the 5.5-inch wide aprons to the legs are actually through mortises, or they escape out the top. They're open, and you know, there's some wood movement reasons to do this, but there's also just, it's a heck of a lot easier than doing a closed mortise. It's really not sacrificing on the strength at all, but you in order to do it, it's a little bit different. You could go back and chop it just like you would with those closed mortises, but I find it's easier to use a plow plane and a chisel in conjunction to chop it out. So I'm going to come down here to the end of the mortise, and right here is my scribe line. And excuse me, I'm going to get in front of the camera in a second. Just come in with the chisel and lever just a little bit out. So now I've got a little bit of a wall to register against. Put my chisel in the slot, verify that it's straight up and down. Just a little bit of a tap. And I come back here. Just kind of wiggle that chip out. And from there, got my 1/4-inch blade, and I will drop the blade down in that hole that I already started and work my way out. And this will essentially drop the groove down. I'll still have to come back and continue to chisel my way out, but this is just a fast way to remove the majority of this. There's several different ways to go about it, but we could also drill it out with a brace and bit. But you know, this to me, I really enjoy using this little plow plane. So to me, this is just another one of those things where it's more about the journey, and I really just enjoy working with this. And you can see my scribe line here. And all I'm going to do is come at it with a chisel. Just scoop down a little. Kind of rock it in, and it removes a little chip. Hear that? That's basically the sound of the wood giving away and the chisel butting up against the shoulder. So now I've got a nice physical barrier there that I can reference my saw against. So not only do I have kind of the visual assistance of lining up my shoulder with the edge of my bench hook, I've actually got a little groove that I can get the saw to ride against. And really, you get the saw started and it will drop down into that groove, because really, you've got a board and the saw runs across it and it can kind of skitter both ways. But if the board is like a V shape like this and you start on this hollow, naturally it's going to want to slide down into the bottom of that groove. And that's really what's going on here. So I'll start with the toe first, and I'm really lifting up on the saw, taking almost all the weight off the saw, and just light pushes, and it starts to track on that line. And I'll keep working it down, kind of walking my way back on that line. I get to kind of halfway. You can see the line is really established all the way across, but I'm a little bit off down here. So I'll come back and starting on this end, work my way across. Just like we did when we were cutting the rip section of this. Kind of start on one end, start on the other, and make it meet in the middle. And then the straightness of the saw plate will help you to true up that shoulder. My scribe line is right there. I just need to work this section down. I'm at my scribe line here. Just gets a little fat through here and then thins back out on the edge. So I'm really working from kind of here to here. That section in there. Still got a little bit more to do. Okay, that ought to do it. So now that we've got the main cheek cut, we need to go ahead and cut the shoulder like we have on this side of the tenon. And this is basically just 1/2 inch in, and it's on both sides obviously. So I took my square, set to 1/2 inch, went ahead and struck a line right on the inside of the cheek. And when I originally laid the whole thing out, I had scribed across, I'd scribed this line and I scribed it on the edges. So what I'll do, just come back to the shoulder, and like we did before, just relieve the littlest bit of littlest bit of wood to define that shoulder. And then just cut down. Turn it around so I can see my line. And we'll cut away the rest of it. So now we've got that shoulder cut away. It's a pretty good fit. I've got the tiniest little gap along the shoulder line, and I think I can take care of that by just undercutting the shoulder just a little bit. I may not be dead on square. So come over here to the vise. You can use a wider chisel if you want. I kind of like to use a narrower chisel because I can get in and it cuts to the wood just a little bit easier because I'm not trying to push 1 inch wide blade through here. And you can see I'm just slightly undercutting. I'm laying it on the shoulder because I'm at my scribe line right here. So just lay it on the shoulder and I kind of lift up a little bit. I just pop a little bit of that out. And again, you can see it's imperative to have a sharp chisel here. I'm actually kind of polishing the end grain as we go. Just be careful that you're not pulling down this way because you can bruise the shoulder right here. going to stop just inside this shoulder line and leave the tiniest bit there, because you don't want to undercut the visible edges. So now that we've undercut that shoulder a little bit, let's come back and see how our fit is. That's great. Got that shoulder close up nicely. So now I'm going to go ahead and dovetail in the top rail for the top of the drawer. And you know, I always lay this out last. In fact, you can see I've gone ahead and cut the tail on this piece. And in order to make it really easy to get this layout just right, but also as a trick to make sure that you've got a really smooth shoulder on the bottom of the joint, is I'll go in and I'll lay out the tiniest little rabbet on the edge. Laid out the rabbet on both sides. And you can do this any number of ways. You can set up a fence, use your shoulder plane. If you've got a rabbet plane, you can use that. But the idea is to get, you know, maybe a 32nd of an inch shoulder there. So now I can come in and drop those shoulders there, and I ensure that I've got a tight shoulder fit there, because that's going to be a highly, highly visible joint. So let me go ahead and cut the other tail, and we'll come back and scribe it for the pins. Now here's where you can screw up the entire design. I started to transfer the pins, and then I realized that that would be a really bad idea to cut those tails. And here's why. We still have to turn these legs. And in order to turn those legs, we need a center point to reference on the drive spur of the lathe. And I'll remove these. And you can see these 2 points here. This is part of the eccentric turning. Well, I already think I made a bit of a mistake by making this an open-ended mortise, because you can see I don't have much stock to reference off of. In fact, when you go into the back here and you look at where I've got 2 mortises, there's very little space in the middle to reference those. So you can imagine if I were to come in here and lay this dovetail down and actually cut out that dovetail, I would have, you know, next to no space to do that. In fact, I think I've already decided to cut down the length of these dovetails, because you can see just how little space I have between these mortises when I put the whole thing in. And I don't want it to be really super weak there. So at this point, this is really all we can do in the main joinery of this table. And next episode, we'll focus on turning the legs.